Joseph Stalin was 5 feet 4 inches tall. His official photographs showed him as 5 feet 7 inches. How? Platform shoes, elevated podiums, careful camera angles, and systematic photo manipulation where rivals were airbrushed shorter or removed entirely. Mussolini posed shirtless on horseback to project virility, while his military was so weak it couldn't conquer Greece without German rescue. Putin has engineered decades of strong-man imagery, shirtless fishing, horseback riding, judo demonstrations, while Russia's economy is smaller than Italy's and its military struggles against Ukraine. Trump obsesses over handshake dominance and alpha performances, while his businesses filed bankruptcy 6 times. The pattern is consistent across history. Leaders who perform strength most aggressively are often compensating for weakness they can't otherwise hide. Real power is quiet. FDR hid his wheelchair but led America through Depression and World War II. Angela Merkel took no shirtless photos but dominated European politics for 16 years. When leaders constantly tell you how strong they are, they're revealing exactly the opposite. The performance itself is the evidence of insecurity. Understanding this paradox requires examining the psychology of overcompensation, the historical examples that demonstrate the pattern, and why media environments amplify the dynamic. Because the appearance paradox isn't just about individual leaders, it shapes how power operates in the modern world. The psychology begins with a simple insight. Genuinely secure people don't need to constantly demonstrate their security. Someone confident in their intelligence doesn't repeatedly tell you they're smart. Someone actually wealthy doesn't obsessively display wealth symbols. Someone truly powerful doesn't perform power constantly. The performance itself reveals the insecurity driving it. Psychologists call this overcompensation, when someone compensates for perceived inadequacy by exaggerating the opposite quality. The short man who aggressively asserts dominance. The insecure person who constantly brags. The weak leader who performs strength theatrically. The compensation is proportional to the insecurity. The more aggressively someone performs a quality, the more likely they're compensating for lacking it. Alfred Adler, the psychologist who developed inferiority complex theory, described this dynamic precisely. People develop compensatory behaviors in response to feelings of inferiority. Sometimes the compensation is healthy, driving achievement to overcome genuine limitations. But often the compensation becomes performative, creating appearances that substitute for actual capability. The performative compensation follows a pattern. The person exaggerates displays of the quality they feel they lack. Someone insecure about intelligence constantly mentions their education or drops intellectual references. Someone insecure about wealth ostentatiously displays luxury goods. Someone insecure about power performs dominance aggressively. The performance intensity correlates with insecurity depth. Shakespeare captured this in Hamlet. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. When someone insists too strenuously on a quality, their honesty, their loyalty, their strength, the insistence itself becomes evidence they lack what they're claiming. Genuine possession doesn't require constant assertion. This creates a paradox for observers. When you see performative displays of strength, you should infer weakness, but the performance is designed to create the opposite impression, to convince audiences that the performance reflects reality rather than compensating for its absence. Distinguishing genuine strength from performed compensation requires looking past the performance to outcomes. Stalin provides the clearest historical example of the appearance paradox in action. Stalin was acutely insecure about his height, his Georgian accent when speaking Russian, his lack of formal education compared to old Bolsheviks like Trotsky, and his peripheral role in the 1917 revolution. These insecurities drove elaborate compensatory performances. The height manipulation was systematic. Official photographs were retouched to make Stalin appear taller and rivals appear shorter. When photographed with other leaders, Stalin stood on boxes or elevated platforms. At public events, podiums were built to specific heights that maximized his apparent stature. Cameramen received instructions on angles that made Stalin appear larger and more imposing. The photo manipulation extended beyond height. Stalin had photographs altered to remove purged rivals from historical images, making it appear they'd never existed. Trotsky, Bukharin, Zinoviev, and dozens of others were airbrushed from photographs after their executions. This wasn't just rewriting history. It was Stalin compensating for his actual peripheral role in the revolution by erasing those who'd been central. Stalin's cult of personality, the great father of peoples, the genius leader, endless propaganda about his wisdom and strength, was compensation for knowing that more educated, more theoretically sophisticated, more genuinely revolutionary Bolsheviks existed. They were murdered, but Stalin's insecurity about comparison drove the cult's intensity. The irony is that Stalin possessed real power. He controlled the Soviet state completely and killed millions. But the power was built through terror and murder rather than genuine leadership capability, ideological brilliance, or revolutionary credentials. Stalin knew this. The compensation was his response to that knowledge. Mussolini's performance was even more theatrical and revealed weakness more clearly. Mussolini cultivated an image of hypermasculinity through choreographed displays, bare-chested while harvesting wheat, riding horses, leading military parades. The photographs were carefully staged propaganda showing physical strength and virility. But Mussolini's actual military was catastrophically weak. Italy's invasion of Greece in 1940 was supposed to demonstrate Italian military prowess and parallel Germany's conquests. Mussolini wanted his own victories to match Hitler's. Instead, Greek forces drove Italian forces back into Albania within weeks. An army of 140,000 Italians couldn't defeat 35,000 Greek defenders. The humiliation was comprehensive. Germany had to intervene to rescue Mussolini from complete disaster. Operation Marita in April 1941 saw German forces invade Greece to bail out the failed Italian offensive. Without German intervention, the Greeks would have pushed Italian forces completely out of Albania. Mussolini's attempt to prove Italian military strength instead proved Italian military incompetence. The North Africa campaign revealed similar weakness. Italian forces in Libya, despite significant numerical superiority over British forces, collapsed repeatedly. Operation Compass in December 1940 saw 36,000 British Commonwealth forces defeat 150,000 Italian forces, capturing 130,000 prisoners. Italian tanks proved inferior. Italian tactics were predictable. Italian morale was poor. German forces under Rommel had to deploy to prevent complete Italian defeat in North Africa. Throughout the campaign, German units did the heavy fighting while Italian units provided support or held secondary positions. In virtually every theater where Italian forces fought, Greece, North Africa, the Balkans, even the invasion of France, they performed poorly and required German rescue or achieved minimal results. The contrast between Mussolini's performative masculinity and Italy's military weakness was stark. All the shirtless photographs, all the staged displays of physical vigor, all the theatrical military parades couldn't compensate for an industrial base too weak to equip a modern military, an officer corps too incompetent to lead effectively, and a regime too corrupt to build genuine military capability. The performance revealed rather than concealed the weakness. Putin's carefully engineered strongman imagery operates similarly. For 2 decades, Putin's image management presented him as physically vigorous, martially skilled, and naturally dominant. The photographs are iconic. Putin shirtless while fishing, Putin on horseback in Siberia, Putin practicing judo, Putin flying fighter jets, Putin diving in submarines, Putin playing hockey. This imagery serves specific purposes. It associates Putin with traditional masculine strength. It implies physical capability despite Putin's age. It suggests competence across diverse domains. It projects control and confidence. The message is, Putin is strong, capable, and dominant. But the imagery compensates for realities it can't change. Russia's economy is smaller than Italy's despite having twice the population and vast natural resources. Russian GDP per capita is lower than Mexico's. The military, despite massive spending, struggled catastrophically against Ukraine, losing thousands of tanks, failing to achieve air superiority, and suffering casualties that may exceed 300,000 dead. The Ukraine invasion particularly exposed the gap between performance and reality. Putin's military was supposed to take Kiev in days. Western intelligence estimated 72 hours for complete Ukrainian collapse. Instead, Russian forces were driven back from Kiev after a month of failed offensive operations. The vaunted Russian military proved incompetent at combined arms warfare, logistics, and maintaining operational security. The failures were comprehensive. Armored columns advancing on Kiev got stuck in traffic jams, ran out of fuel, and were destroyed by Ukrainian forces. Russian communications security was so poor that Ukrainian forces intercepted tactical radio conversations. Russian aircraft flew into Ukrainian air defenses without suppression operations. Generals were killed because they had to use cell phones when encrypted communications failed. The subsequent Russian offensives in Kharkiv and Kherson also failed. Russia lost territory it had captured. The mobilization in September 2022 revealed equipment shortages so severe that mobilized soldiers were told to buy their own gear. Training was minimal, sometimes days rather than months. The gap between Putin's performative strength and Russia's actual military capability was exposed completely. By 2024, Russia had likely suffered over 300,000 casualties, dead and seriously wounded, without achieving strategic objectives. The military that Putin's imagery suggested was powerful, competent, and feared, proved to be corrupt, poorly led, and inadequately equipped. The performance couldn't compensate for systemic weakness that decades of corruption and mismanagement had created. Putin knows Russia's weakness relative to the West. GDP 1/20th of NATO combined, technology lagging behind, demographics declining, economy dependent on resource extraction rather than innovation. The performative strength compensates for this knowledge. The more aggressively Putin performs strength, the more clearly he reveals his understanding that Russia is actually weak. Trump's obsession with dominance displays follows the pattern precisely. The aggressive handshakes designed to pull other leaders off balance. Shinzo Abe, Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, all experienced Trump attempting physical dominance through handshake manipulation. The constant assertions of being the strongest, having the best, knowing more than anyone. The fixation on crowd sizes, ratings, and visible symbols of success. This performance compensates for documented weaknesses. 6 business bankruptcies. Trump Taj Mahal, Trump Plaza Hotel, Trump Hotels and Casinos Resorts, Trump Entertainment Resorts, twice, and Trump Plaza Associates. Multiple failed businesses including Trump University, shut down after fraud lawsuits. Trump Steaks, Trump Airlines, Trump Vodka, Trump Mortgage, and Trump Casinos that somehow lost money despite the house always winning. The Atlantic City casinos demonstrate the pattern particularly clearly. Running a casino profitably should be straightforward. The games are mathematically designed to favor the house. Yet Trump's casinos filed for bankruptcy multiple times. How? Massive debt from over-leveraging, poor management decisions, and siphoning cash to Trump personally while starving the businesses of operating capital. The bankruptcies allowed Trump to escape debt while contractors, employees, and investors lost money. The business failures reveal someone whose success was largely inherited wealth and branding rather than genuine business acumen. Trump received over $400 million from his father, according to New York Times investigations. Multiple analyses suggest that if Trump had simply invested his inheritance in index funds, he'd be wealthier than he claims to be from his business ventures. A presidency that lost the House in 2018, the Senate and White House in 2020, and faces multiple criminal indictments. Someone genuinely successful and powerful doesn't need to constantly assert their success and power. The handshake dominance is particularly revealing. Genuinely confident leaders don't attempt to physically dominate through handshakes. They're secure enough to shake hands normally. Trump's aggressive handshake pulling reveals insecurity, the need to establish dominance through physical performance, because other forms of dominance aren't secure. The contrast with leaders who possessed genuine power without performative displays is instructive. FDR provides the clearest example. Roosevelt contracted polio in 1921, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. He could stand only with leg braces and assistance. He used a wheelchair constantly in private. But FDR and his staff made extraordinary efforts to hide the disability from the public. Photographers were instructed never to photograph Roosevelt in his wheelchair or being carried. News media cooperated in what would be impossible today, a gentleman's agreement not to publish photographs showing the president's disability. Public appearances were carefully staged, so FDR appeared standing or sitting normally without revealing his paralysis. The concealment served a purpose. In the 1930s, disability carried stigma suggesting weakness and incapacity for leadership. FDR believed, probably correctly, that visible disability would damage his political effectiveness, so the wheelchair was hidden and the disability downplayed. But FDR's actual power was immense, leading America through the Great Depression and World War II, fundamentally reshaping the federal government, winning 4 presidential elections. The concealment was about managing perception, not compensating for actual weakness. FDR knew he possessed real power, political skill, strategic vision, communication ability. The disability didn't threaten that, so hiding it was pragmatic image management rather than insecure compensation. The difference is subtle but crucial. FDR hit a physical limitation while possessing genuine capability. Stalin, Mussolini, Putin, and Trump performed strength to compensate for lacking it. FDR's concealment was strategic. Their performances are psychological, driven by insecurity about whether they actually possess the qualities they're performing. Merkel provides a contemporary example of quiet power. Merkel led Germany for 16 years, dominated European politics, navigated multiple crises from the 2008 financial crisis to the refugee crisis to COVID, and became the de facto leader of Europe. She did this without dramatic performances, without theatrical displays, without constant assertions of strength or brilliance. Merkel's style was deliberately understated. She appeared in the same outfits repeatedly. She avoided grand rhetoric. She operated through methodical analysis and quiet negotiation. She never performed dominance or strength, and she was arguably the most powerful Western leader of her era. The contrast with leaders who perform power constantly is stark. Merkel possessed actual power and didn't need to perform it. Putin performs power constantly because Russian weakness requires compensation. Trump performs dominance because his actual achievements don't establish it. Merkel's quiet competence was possible because she actually possessed the capabilities she never claimed to have. The media environment amplifies the appearance paradox in specific ways. Before television, leaders were known primarily through written descriptions, radio addresses, and still photographs. Physical appearance and performative displays mattered less than words and policies. FDR could hide his wheelchair because visual documentation was limited and controllable. Television changed everything by making visual performance central to political success. The Kennedy-Nixon debates in 1960 demonstrated this dramatically. Radio listeners thought Nixon won the debate on substance. Television viewers thought Kennedy won on appearance. He looked confident, composed, and vigorous while Nixon appeared uncomfortable, sweaty, and uncertain. The details reveal how thoroughly television altered politics. Nixon arrived at the debate having been hospitalized recently and losing weight. He wore a gray suit that blended into the gray background. He refused makeup despite the hot studio lights. He looked pale, sweaty, and uncomfortable. His 5 o'clock shadow showed darkly on black and white television. Kennedy, by contrast, had spent weeks tanning in California. He wore a dark suit that contrasted sharply with the background. He accepted professional makeup. He looked healthy, confident, and presidential. The substance of what they said mattered less than how they appeared saying it. Post-debate polls showed the dramatic impact. People who heard the debate on radio, focusing on arguments and policy substance, generally scored it as a narrow Nixon win or a draw. People who watched on television, reacting to visual performance, overwhelmingly thought Kennedy won. The same debate, different media, opposite conclusions. This wasn't just about Kennedy versus Nixon. It was about television fundamentally changing what mattered in politics. Visual performance became as important as policy knowledge. Appearing confident became as valuable as having accomplishments. Looking strong mattered as much as being effective. The medium created entirely new requirements for political success. This created incentives for leaders to focus on visual performance. Looking strong became as important as being strong. Performing confidence became as valuable as having accomplishments to be confident about. The medium privileged appearance over substance in ways that rewarded performance skills over governing capability. Trump represents the culmination of this trend. His entire career has been performance. Reality television, wrestling appearances, carefully staged business success imagery. He understands intuitively that in media environments, perception often matters more than reality. So he performs strength, success, and dominance constantly because he knows audiences trained by television and social media respond to performance. But the performance remains compensation. Trump performs strength because he lacks the actual achievements that would make performance unnecessary. Someone who'd actually built a successful business empire wouldn't need to constantly assert their business genius. Someone actually respected by peers wouldn't obsess over crowd sizes and ratings. The intensity of the performance reveals the insecurity driving it. Social media intensifies these dynamics further. Platforms reward performative displays, dramatic claims, theatrical gestures, aggressive assertions, generate engagement. Quiet competence doesn't produce viral content. This creates incentives for leaders to perform constantly, rather than governing effectively. Putin's shirtless photographs spread globally through social media in ways that would have been impossible in previous media environments. Trump's aggressive handshakes became memes. Mussolini's theatrics would have generated millions of shares. The media environment rewards the performance, while making it more obviously compensatory to anyone analyzing rather than just consuming. The deepfake era adds another dimension. When visual appearance can be manipulated completely, the distinction between actual capability and performed strength becomes even more important to maintain. Leaders can appear however they want visually. This makes analyzing outcomes rather than appearances essential for assessing actual strength versus compensatory performance. The historical pattern is consistent. Leaders who perform strength most aggressively rarely possess genuine strength. Stalin murdered millions but was insecure about his peripheral revolutionary role. Mussolini posed shirtless but led Italy to catastrophic military defeats. Putin engineers strongman imagery while Russia's economy stagnates and its military fails in Ukraine. Trump performs dominance while his businesses fail and his presidency ended in electoral defeat. Meanwhile, leaders with genuine power often perform minimally. FDR led through depression and war from a wheelchair he hid. Merkel dominated European politics for 16 years without dramatic performances. Quiet confidence based on actual capability doesn't require constant performance. Insecurity drives the need to constantly assert qualities you don't actually possess. The appearance paradox operates as a diagnostic. When you observe leaders performing strength aggressively through imagery, rhetoric, physical dominance displays, or constant assertions, you should infer insecurity and likely weakness. When leaders operate quietly, competently, without theatrical displays, they may actually possess the capabilities that performative leaders lack. This doesn't mean all quiet leaders are competent or all performative leaders are weak, but the pattern is strong enough to be diagnostic. Overcompensation reveals what's being compensated for. The performance tells you what's actually absent. When someone constantly tells you how strong they are, believe the opposite. The implications extend beyond individual leaders. Political systems that reward performance over substance tend to elevate leaders who are better at appearing strong, than being effective. Media environments that privilege visual spectacle over policy outcomes create incentives for theatrical leadership regardless of governing capability. Electorates trained to respond to performance may select leaders based on how convincingly they perform qualities, rather than whether they actually possess them. Breaking this pattern requires conscious effort to analyze outcomes rather than performances, to assess actual accomplishments rather than theatrical displays, to distinguish genuine confidence from insecure compensation. It requires recognizing that the leader who constantly asserts their strength is revealing their weakness, while the leader who quietly delivers results may actually possess the capabilities they never claim. The appearance paradox isn't just about spotting insecure leaders. It's about understanding how power actually operates versus how it's performed. Real power is quiet because it doesn't need validation. Performed power is loud because it compensates for absence. The louder the performance, the emptier the reality. When leaders spend enormous energy on appearing strong, they're spending that energy because they lack the actual strength that would make the appearance unnecessary. Stalin could manipulate photographs, but couldn't create genuine revolutionary credentials. Mussolini could pose shirtless, but couldn't build a competent military. Putin can engineer imagery, but can't make Russia's economy competitive. Trump can perform dominance, but can't turn failing businesses into successes. The performance reveals what it attempts to hide. The compensation demonstrates what's being compensated for. And once you recognize the pattern, you see it everywhere. The pattern is diagnostic, consistent, and revealing. When you see aggressive performance of strength, look for the weakness driving it. When you see quiet competence, look for the actual power underneath. The appearance paradox operates reliably. Those who need to appear strong usually aren't. Those who are strong rarely need to appear so. The diagnostic value extends beyond politics. In business, the CEO who constantly talks about their vision and genius often runs companies into the ground while quiet, competent managers build sustainable success. In personal relationships, people who constantly assert their loyalty or love often prove unreliable, while those who simply demonstrate these qualities through actions prove dependable. The pattern is universal because the psychology is universal. Insecurity drives performance while security enables quiet confidence.